and welcome to our class on the life of Elijah. This is class number 6, and it's titled Discouragement. In class, we'll be taking a little bit of time talking about what we learned from Swindoll's book, chapter 7, titled Sure Cure for the Blues. And then we probably will talk a little bit about our Bible memory verse, and I might even see if anybody wants to give a try at reciting all of them. All 3 verses, and just a few reminders about the final. The point is to recite 3 verses to somebody outside of class. You can recite them all at once, or you can spread them out and recite them one a week if you want. You can recite it to different people. And then you have the people or the person or persons that you recite to sign the final paper, and you can either turn in your paper in class or take a picture of it and email it to me. And don't forget that we did these short little studies on each verse that were intended to help you to memorize them. And those were in weeks 2, 3, and 5. So on we get to our study in 1 Kings. Ahab was known as the most wicked of the northern kings. And with the influence of his wife Jezebel, he had introduced the worship of Baal and Asherah to the northern kingdom of Israel. And God responded by sending Elijah to call for a drought. After 3.5 years, there was a showdown between the gods on Mount Carmel. The prophets of Baal spent the day crying out to their God, but we read there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. After Elijah repaired the altar of Yahweh, he offered a simple prayer and fire fell from heaven. And then the prophets of Baal were put to death. Then Elijah prays for rain. And as the rain begins to pour, Elijah and Ahab head back to Jezreel, which is kind of a winter capital in the valley of Jezreel. Okay, so chapter 19, verses 1 through 10, we're going to call this Man on the Run. Verse 1. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, also how he had executed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. Now, I don't know if you realize this, Jezebel's not too happy with Elijah. I mean, he has put to death 450 of her favorite people. Well, here's our first quiz alert. There's going to be 8 of them today. The first one is this. Number 1 is expect attacks. I think that most of us are aware that the enemy can attack us when we are weak, but he also attacks us when we are strong. Elijah has just been through the greatest victory of his life, defeating the prophets of Baal.
49-yarder. Chris Williams is back.
A lot of faith in Sean White.
Not a margin of error for Sean White, and he's missed. Williams does bring it out. Does he get a block? Here he goes. Chris Williams is going to do it again. Unbelievable. 117 yards and a back pedal. Just made it to the end zone.
I didn't like the ending, but I sure liked the start.
His 4th kick return touchdown.
The previous play is under review by the command center.
Was that knee down before he broke the plane?
And we'll take another look here, because I think the issue or the question is whether Chris Williams was down before he crossed the goal line. And that knee is down before the ball crosses the plane.
After review, the Hamilton player was down at the 1-yard line. It's first down, Hamilton at the 1.
So we'll call it a 116-yard return and no touchdown.
Can you get over that? I like what the announcer said. I like the way he started. Wasn't too happy about the way he ended. I think sometimes we can celebrate a little bit too early when we have a big victory. You have to learn to run the ball all the way into the end zone. And the end zone is when we get to heaven. So we don't let up until then. Even at what seems to be your strongest moments, you can find yourself attacked. You can still be faced with something that will strike fear in your heart or temptation into your soul. Peter wrote, be sober, Be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Scottish pastor Andrew Bonner said this, "Let us be as watchful after the victory as before the battle." Verse 3, and when he saw that, when Elijah realizes what's happening, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. He ran for his life. Okay, quiz alert number 2. We all get afraid. Everybody gets afraid. Jacob, the father of the nation of Israel, was afraid. Genesis 46:3, he was afraid to go to Egypt. Moses was afraid. Numbers 21:34, he was afraid of Og, the king of Bashan. And God said, do not fear him. Joshua, the conqueror of Canaan, was afraid. When it came to the battle at Gibeon, the Lord said to him, do not fear them. Gideon, Gideon, the conqueror, the great conqueror of the Midianites, he was afraid. Judges 6:23, then the Lord said to him, peace be with you, do not fear, you shall not die. Even this man who has called down fire from heaven. Remember James 5:17? Hopefully you've got this memorized. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. He was afraid, just like you and I become afraid from time to time. My point with this lesson is not to give you 3 things to do to stop being afraid, but to simply take a moment and realize that fear is common to all of us. Elijah was afraid. He was just like you and me. And so he runs to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. Now, just a side note, for those of you who've been coming to Bob's Bible study on Wednesday nights in the book of Judges, the majority of the battle with Deborah, Barak, and Sisera takes place in this valley of Jezreel, or the valley of Megiddo, which is between Mount Tabor, you see in the middle on the right, and the Kishon River. And the Kishon River, that's the same river where Elijah slew the prophets of Baal. And that's the valley, it's the same valley that Elijah will run through several hundred years later to escort Ahab back to Jezreel from Carmel. Same locations. And now Elijah runs to Beersheba. We often think of Beersheba as being the southernmost part of the nation, and that's correctly. We think of Beersheba as being the farthest southern part. And Beersheba is not in the northern kingdom of Israel where Elijah has been, but belongs to a different kingdom, the southern kingdom of Judah. And here in Beersheba, Elijah will leave his servant there in Beersheba. Verse 4, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die and said, it is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. A broom tree. It's also called the white broom tree. It's a bush that can grow 5 to 10 feet tall, and it lives in desert places. And he sits down under this bush, and he prays that he might die. Quiz alert. Number 3, we all get discouraged. Elijah was afraid like we are at times. Now, just like us, Elijah is depressed. He's discouraged. And there's often a connection between fear and depression. I've found that a lot of people struggle from time to time with depression. Maybe even a lot of famous people. Job got depressed. You'd say, well, of course. Job 3:11, he says, why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? But Moses also got depressed. Numbers 11:14, I'm not able to bear all these people alone because the burden is too heavy for me. If you treat me like this, please kill me here and now, he says to God. Jeremiah got depressed. Jeremiah 20:14, he writes, cursed be the day in which I was born. Let the day not be blessed in which my mother bore me. No happy birthdays for me. Elijah is one of my heroes, got depressed, and he called his depression his black dog. If you read about in his memoirs, in his biographies. The great preacher C.H. Spurgeon was known to suffer at times from depression. In the book Lectures to My Students, he has a chapter titled The Minister's Fainting Fits. That's what he calls it, the minister's fainting fits. This is what Spurgeon writes. He says this: "As it is recorded that David in the heat of the battle waxed faint, so it may be written of all the servants of the Lord. Fits of depression come over the most of us. Usually, cheerful as we may be, we must at times be cast down. The strong are not always vigorous, the wise not always ready, the brave not always courageous, and the joyous not always happy. There may be here and there men of iron to whom wear and tear work no perceptible detriment, but surely the rust frets even these, and for ordinary men the Lord knows, and makes them to know that they are but dust." He goes on to say, knowing by most painful experience what deep depression of spirit means, being visited therewith at seasons by no means few or far between, I thought it might be consolatory to some of my brethren if I gave my thoughts thereon, that younger men might not fancy that some strange thing had happened to them when they became for a season possessed by melancholy, and that sadder men might know that one upon whom the sun has shone right joyously did not always walk in the light. It is not necessary he's talking about himself, it is not necessary by quotations from the biographies of eminent ministers to prove that seasons of fearful prostration have fallen to the lot of them, if not to the most of them, if not all of them. And then he says, the life of Luther might suffice to give 1,000 instances, and he was by no means of the weaker sort. His great spirit was often in the seventh heaven of exaltation, and as frequently on the borders of despair. His deathbed was not free from tempests, and he sobbed himself into his last sleep like a great wearied child. My point in all of this, if you get depressed, you're not alone. We all need encouragement. We all get discouraged. We all need encouragement from time to time.
And one of the big influences in my life, the little town I grew up in, Hapeville, by the airport in Atlanta, was where Chick-fil-A started. Till I was in high school, we had the only Chick-fil-A on the planet, but Truett Cathy was a big influence in my life. And I remember being a kid, and Truett said to me one time, "Do you know how to tell when somebody needs encouragement?" And I was like, "No, sir, Mr. Cathy." He said, "If they're breathing." He said, "Everybody needs encouragement. It doesn't cost you anything to give it to them." Wow. 60 years later, I remember that.
So how many of us are still breathing right now? We probably need encouragement. All of us. We all get discouraged. We all struggle at times. In verse 5, then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." The Hebrew word for angel is malach, which means a messenger or a representative. This individual here is a messenger sent from God. God sees Elijah and he has dispatched someone to help him. Let me just say this. You are not alone. You are not alone. And so as he slept under the broom tree, angel touches him and says, "Arise and eat." Here's a quiz alert. This is number 4. I'm going to call it Watch Your Health. Watch your health. Sometimes the answer to our depression isn't a simple one, but sometimes it is. Oswald Chambers wrote, "The angel did not give Elijah a vision or explain the scriptures to him or do anything remarkable. He told Elijah to do the most ordinary thing, to get up and eat." Sometimes depression comes because we've simply been pushing ourselves too hard and we need to take a break. We need to rest, take a nap. Sometimes depression comes because our diet is off. Blood sugars can be too high, too low. Maybe you need to examine your diet. Maybe lose some weight and maybe embrace a better diet. Sometimes depression lasts too long because we've taken too long of a break, and it's time to arise, get up, get moving, go for a walk. Breaks are good, but sometimes depression is the thing that's driving you to sleep and withdraw more than you need to. So watch your health. Number 6, it says, then he looked, and there by his head was a cake, baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Now, scientific research has discovered the actual chemical makeup of this cake. It's made up, I got the recipe here. Flour, white sugar, egg whites, vanilla, cream of tartar, salt. You know what that makes it? It was an angel food cake. Huh? Angel food cake? Okay. No, it wasn't. Verse 7, and the angel of the Lord came back the second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you. The angel of the Lord. And if you notice, it's all caps, the angel of Yahweh. Now, we learn now a little bit more about this specific angel. This phrase, the angel of the Lord, is a specific, unique person in the Old Testament. The language in the Hebrew, Malach Yahweh, is consistent throughout the Old Testament. This is a specific person. He appears in 54 verses throughout the Old Testament. This is just Old Testament, not New Testament. He appeared to Abraham in Genesis 22. He appears to Moses in Exodus chapter 3, to Gideon in Judges chapter 6, and to many others. 54 verses. He appears to quite a few people. We believe that this is none other than an appearance of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. This is what we call a theophany, God appearing in a human form, and this happens before he takes on human flesh in Bethlehem. When Jesus said in John 8:56, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad, well, it's because he'd been there with Abraham. If you look at Genesis 22, he appeared to Abraham. He spent time with Abraham. And now he appears to Elijah. Now, I find it interesting, maybe this is just a coincidence, but I find it interesting that Elijah actually returns the favor, and he shows up in Jesus' day. In Luke 9:28, it says, it came to pass after 8 days, after these things, that Jesus takes Peter, John, and James and goes up to a mountain to pray. As he prays, the appearance of his face was altered. His robe became white and glistening. And in verse 30 it says, behold, 2 men talked with him, who were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. And so Moses and Elijah are speaking to Jesus about his upcoming death. Maybe they are encouraging him to keep moving towards the thing that God has called him to do. Just like the angel is now going to help Elijah move forward. So back to our text, verse 8. And so he arose and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. 40 days and 40 nights, that's the same length that Moses spent on Mount Sinai. And it says he goes as far as Horeb. Now, Horeb is better known by its other name, which is Mount Sinai. It's the same mountain that the children of Israel camped out at, where Moses receives the 10 Commandments, where the people go astray with the golden calf, and where they also, this is where they depart from when they start their 40-year journey to the promised land. Now, let's look at the map a little bit. So first Elijah goes from Jezreel to Beersheba, which is about 100 miles, and then he goes down to Mount Sinai. Now, the traditional view is the Mount Sinai is in the Sinai Peninsula, but we kind of think now that it really is this mountain here in Saudi Arabia. And from the satellite view, you can even see as it turns around at the base of the mountain, there is a pile of rocks. And I've seen pictures of what people have taken of. This is all fenced off, so you're not supposed to get to it. But there's inscribed in the rocks are pictures of cows like the golden calf. We think this is the golden calf altar. So he goes as far as Horeb. What is Elijah doing? I think he's running to God. He's going back to where God first calls Moses at the burning bush. He's going back to where Moses received the 10 Commandments. I think he's coming here looking for God. Now, there's a quiz alert here, number 5. I'm going to call it Time with Jesus. Now, I'm sure that there's probably some who say that Elijah's running from his responsibilities, and you could make that point. I'm not going to argue with that. I see this as Elijah running to God. He needs time with God to be renewed, refreshed, restored. We talked last week about withdrawing in prayer, how important it is to have a daily quiet time, just a few minutes a day, just away from the hustle and bustle and spending time with God. But there's times when we need to take more than a few minutes with God. I think this is part of the value of going on a retreat. As a senior pastor, an important part of my year every year was to go to the senior pastors' retreats that Chuck would hold out at Murrieta Hot Springs. Retreats can be a chance to disconnect from the internet, to put our phones down, to listen to God. Hopefully we'll be encouraged by good Bible studies, prayer, wholesome fellowship. I found at times in my ministry that it was important to get away by myself, even just by myself, without retreats, even if just for a few hours. Often it was when a crisis would hit, and I didn't always have somebody around to call or to talk to, and so I'd block out time in my calendar and spend a morning and get away by myself. I didn't run to Mount Sinai, but I tended to go down to Corona del Mar. And it would be early in the morning. Nobody else would be around. It'd be cold, overcast, seagulls squawking, sitting in a beach chair in front of the waves with my Bible in my lap and a pad of paper next to me. It'd be a chance for me to gain fresh vision, to clarify my calling, to get new direction. I had some significant times down at the beach where God gave me fresh direction for the church. Sometimes no new direction. Sometimes it's just a sense of peace, of just being with God. It may be that you need some fresh direction in your lives. Don't neglect the possibility that God may be calling you to spend some extra time with Him. Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 3. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily entangles us, ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. Make sure that time apart is, make sure that you're running to Jesus, time with Jesus, because I tell you, he knows how to help you. Verse 9, and there he went into a cave and spent the night in that place. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? Now, I wonder what God's tone of voice was when he says this to Elijah. Is God angry? Is he rebuking Elijah for coming out to Horeb? What are you waking me up for? Who are you? Maybe he's loving. Maybe he's trying to draw Elijah out. What are you doing here, Elijah? Kind of reminds me of what God says to Adam after he ate the forbidden fruit. Then the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, where are you? I don't think God didn't know where he was. I think God's trying to get Adam to think about this, Verse 10, and so he said, this is Elijah says, I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. I alone am left. Now, we've already established that, this simply isn't true. A few weeks back, we were looking at when Elijah meets Obadiah, who had already told Elijah that he's rescued 100 prophets of Yahweh. They were living in caves. Elijah already knows this. But he kind of embellishes it a little bit. So I alone am left. Now, here's a quiz alert. Quiz alert, this is number 6. Depression distorts truth. Elijah is depressed, and frankly, life looks horrible. And sometimes it happens to us. Sometimes our perspective is just a little off. And if we're not careful, we can tend to, the way we look at things, we're looking through the colored glasses of our moods, our emotions. Proverbs 15:15 says, all the days of the afflicted are evil, but he who is of a merry heart has a continual feast. It's not that all the days of the afflicted really are evil, but that there's this mentality we can take on from time to time where we label ourselves as, I'm the afflicted person. And it's during those times that everything looks bad to us. But maybe that's not quite true. There was a farmer whose neighbor was absolutely negative, no matter what. If it was raining, the farmer would say to his neighbor, boy, it looks like rain. God's kind of sort of washing everything clean. Well, yeah, but if it keeps going, we might flood, you know. And then the sun would come out and the neighbor would say, if it keeps that up, it's going to scorch the crops. And the farmer thought, what am I going to do with this guy? So he trains his dog to walk on water. He didn't tell his neighbor, but he took him duck hunting. Boom, boom, they brought these ducks out of the sky, and he said to his dog, go get them. The dog went across and picked them up and hopped back into the boat. Nothing wet, just his paws. The farmer said, well, what do you think of that, huh? And the neighbor said, can't swim, can he? Do you ever stop and listen to what's coming out of your mouth? When we get to hearing ourselves talk about how everything around us is getting horrible, no matter how bad it really is, maybe we need a little reality check, like Elijah. Verse 11. Then he said, God says, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. Verse 12. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. Now, wind, earthquake, fire. That's No. That sadly is not a reference to the 70s band Earth, Wind, and Fire. That's a different animal altogether. No, but but think about this. Sometimes God is in a fierce wind. God spoke to Job out of the whirlwind. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, Job 38:1. Sometimes God is in the fire or the earthquake when God speaks to Moses in Israel. At Sinai, it says in Exodus 19:18, the Lord descended upon it with fire, and the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. But sometimes God isn't in these things. If we're always expecting God to speak to us through some spectacular manner, sometimes we're going to miss it. There's a principle here that can be applied even to our worship music. Sometimes God works in the big sound, the big band, the big drums, loud guitars. But sometimes God's presence is in the quiet with just a single guitar, a quiet piano, maybe a cappella. For Elijah in this moment, God is going to speak through the still small voice. The American Standard translates this a sound of a gentle blowing. The NIV translates it a gentle whisper. The New Revised Standard translates this a sound of sheer silence. John Gill, an old expositor from a long, long time ago, he wrote, not rough, but gentle, more like whispering than roaring, something soft, easy, and musical. The Targum, which was an interpretation of the Hebrew Bible, the Targum says, the voice of those that praise God in silence. So here's a quiz alert. Number 7, turn the volume down. Turn the volume down. Since ancient times, man has had a problem of too much noise. The ancient prophets realized that if they were to hear from God, they needed quiet. It talks about them rising up early and God speaking to them. In Matthew 14:23, it says, when Jesus sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, and when evening came, he was alone there. Look at the contrast between the multitude and being alone. The ancient church father John Chrysostom wrote about this verse, and he said that it was showing us that solitude is good when we have need to pray to God. For this also he goes into the desert and there spends the night in prayer, to teach us that for prayer we should seek stillness, both in time and place. Sometimes, if we want God to speak to us, we need to slow down. Slow down and listen. Sometimes, if we want God to speak to us, we need to quiet down a bit. David wrote, Truly my soul silently waits for God. From him comes my salvation. Mary learned to do this in Luke 10:38. That happened that as they went and he entered a certain village, a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house, and she had a sister called Mary who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. She wasn't speaking, she just heard his word. Verse 40. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me. She's talking. Verse 41. And Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part which will not be taken away from her. Before refrigerators, people used ice houses to preserve their food. Ice houses had thick walls, no windows, and a tightly fitted door. In winter, when streams and lakes were frozen, large blocks of ice were cut, hauled to the ice houses, and covered with sawdust. Often the ice would last well into the summer. One man lost a valuable watch while working in an ice house. He searched diligently for it, carefully raking through the sawdust, but didn't find it. His fellow workers also looked, but their efforts too proved futile. A small boy who had heard about the fruitless search slipped into the ice house during the noon hour and soon emerged with the watch. Amazed, the men asked him how he found it. Well, he said, I closed the door, I lay down in the sawdust, I kept very still. Soon I heard the watch ticking. Often the question is not whether God is speaking, but whether we are being still enough and quiet enough to hear. Amy Carmichael wrote, God always answers us in the deeps, never in the shallows of our soul. Verse 13, and so it was when Elijah heard it, the still small voice, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. Killed your prophets. Paul quotes this passage, and he says that Elijah was pleading with God against Israel. There is, and so see, there's more here than just complaining. Elijah is asking God for judgment on Israel. In Romans 11:2, it says, God has not cast away his people whom he foreknew. Or do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah, how he pleads with God against Israel, saying, Lord, they have killed your prophets and torn down your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life. Now, see, it would be correct to say that Jezebel was after Elijah, but it would be incorrect to say that all of Israel was against him. In Romans 11, God is teaching that God is not against Israel. He has not cast all of them away. That's the point of Romans 11. And yet, keep this in mind, Elijah is asking God to judge the nation, and God is going to answer that. Verse 15, then the Lord said to him, go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Also you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. Did I say that right? Anoint Hazael as king over Syria, anoint Jehu as king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. Now, mentions three guys, Hazael, Jehu, and Elisha. And there's one more quiz alert. This is the last quiz alert. Number 8. You're not finished. You're not finished. Elisha wants his life to be over. But God still has things for him to do. He has places for him to go, things to do, people to see. Sometimes depression freezes us in our tracks, and we think that life is over. It's not. It's not. Some of Elijah's missions has to do with raising up the next generation of leaders. Some of the things on Elijah's to-do list won't be accomplished by him, but by those he raises up to take his place. Others will finish what he started. As we mature in life, we may not always be able to do all the things we used to do. Yet hopefully we've acquired this thing we call wisdom that we can pass on to those who will follow after us. You're not done yet. There's more ahead for you to do. Now, Hazael is an interesting choice. He will be the next king of Syria, which is a longtime enemy of Israel. And yet the Syrians seem to have some kind of respect for the God of Israel and its prophets. Elijah won't be doing the anointing of Hazael. Elisha will be. That's interesting. Elijah doesn't actually do this. Now, Jehu's also interesting. He will rule the northern kingdom. He'll take over after Ahab. Elijah won't anoint him either. Elisha will have one of his intern prophets do it. That's in 2 Kings 9. Now, Elisha, who will be the next prophet, he's going to be the only one that Elijah will actually anoint to take his place. But the point is this. If you're still breathing, God isn't finished with you. He still has you here for a purpose. You have places to go, things to do, people to see. Verse 17, it shall be that whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill, and whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will kill. So God will be bringing judgment to Israel, just as Elijah has been asking for, but it's not going to be Elijah's job. These three men will be instrumental in eradicating the worship of Baal in the northern kingdom of Israel. Verse 18, God says, yet I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. 7,000 in Israel. So Elijah's not alone, not like he thinks. You too are not alone. You're not alone. And even when you don't know who else is on your side, God is on your side. He will never leave us nor forsake us. He's for us. He's not against us. Psalm 27:10 says, when my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will take care of me. God's on your side. Chapter 19, verse 19. I'm going to call this last passage Finding Elisha. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this paragraph because I want to spend a little more time on it when we talk about Elijah raising up a successor, which is our last class. That's in a couple of weeks. So verse 19, so he departed from there and found Elisha the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he was with the 12th. And Elijah passed by him and threw his mantle on him. Now, so he found Elisha. Elisha is from the town of Abel Meholah, which means meadow of dancing. And Abel Meholah is along the Jordan River, and it's 260 miles north of Mount Sinai, where Elijah is at the moment. So he's got a little ways to go to get there. And he's plowing with 12 yoke of oxen. So the family, Elisha's family, apparently owns 12 set of oxen with 12 plows. all being used to plow up the fields. And Elisha is working with the last set of oxen. And so there's an indication here that he came from a well-to-do family. And Elijah threw his mantle on him. The throwing of the prophet's cloak around somebody symbolized the passing of the power and the authority of the office to that individual. Verse 20, and he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, please let me kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you. And he said, go back again, for what have I done to you? Now, New Living Translation says that Elijah replied, go on back, but think about what I have done to you. And so verse 21, so Elisha turned back from him, took a yoke of oxen, slaughtered them, and boiled their flesh, using the oxen's equipment, and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and followed Elijah and became his servant. So Elijah doesn't spend a whole lot of time saying his goodbyes. He makes a sacrifice and he heads off to follow Elijah. And he's going to spend the next 3 to 4 years, we think, training for this ministry that he's going to have now. And he's going to train by being a servant. Now, this next lesson, you can write this down if you want, but this is not on the quiz. And the last lesson is this: ministry starts and ends with serving. Elisha will start his ministry by being a servant, but it never really changes. It's always about being a servant. Mark 10:45, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Okay, that's the end of our study. For those of you who are watching online, here's the quiz. There are 8 things. You can pause it here and take a screenshot, or pause it and write them all down and then email me the answers. And for your homework, you're going to want to read chapter 8, When God Says Enough. If you want, you can read chapter 9 because we're not going to really cover it. But I want you to read chapter 8 and work on James 5, verses 16 through 18. And if you want to do your final, you can go ahead and do it, or do as much as you can and do a little more the next week. And so with that, let me first pray. So Jesus, I pray for each one that's watching. I pray, Lord, that you would be speaking to them, helping them to take a step back and hear your voice. I pray for those that are discouraged, Lord, that they would realize that you are for them, you're not against them, and that maybe things aren't quite as bad as they're thinking it is. Oh God, touch your people. Help us to follow you. Help us to serve you. Thank you. And now I pray that the Lord would bless you and keep you, that the Lord would make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. I pray that the Lord would lift up his countenance on you and give you his peace. Amen.